This is Andrea Longton.
This is Leah Freemouth.
And this is Ebony Perkins. And we are Renegade Capital.
All views expressed in this podcast are our own. We are not financial planners, investment advisors, or tax advisors. The views that we have on this show do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the people who sign our paychecks. So please keep that in mind and always consult a trained financial professional before you start moving your hard-earned money. Let's dive in. Actually, I'm really excited about this when we're talking about representation at financial services conferences. We're talking to Sonya Dreizler and Liv Gagnon today. They recently co-founded the Choir certification. And it's a certification for financial services conferences that the conferences represent a diverse population, which on a surface level kind of has a yawn factor. But the more that I've thought about it and the more even that we've chatted, who is showing up in leadership events and who gets to come to leadership events in financial services and how is finance flowing and who gets to decide what we talk about is more and more important in my mind, that it's more than just white men on a panel talking about finance, and it's more than white men in the room talking about finance. And I'm focusing in on white men because white men do disproportionately manage assets in the United States. 98.6% of all assets under management in the US are controlled or managed by people who identify as both white and male. And if the same people keep showing up to the same leadership conferences, places where we're talking on stage about how finance is working, how to think about finance, but also in the hallways of conferences can be more important than on the stage of conferences, because in the hallways of conferences are where deals get done, where some people wait an entire year to say, I want to talk to this person at the conference because I want to make money move in this way and I want to close a deal for this. So who shows up to conferences is important for how money moves, but also how women and people of color are able to advance in finance. So I knew it was going to be cool because Sonya and Liv are just fantastic. And the more I think about it, the more I realize why they transitioned in their really successful careers to do a certification for financial services and why they're that passionate about it. So I'm really psyched for them to come and talk to us about their stories, about what they're doing, and what it means to them to have diverse representation at financial conferences.
Conferences are a place where people get to really speak and really have the ability to change the thoughts and the direction that the industry is moving. And if you don't have, different minds communicating and sharing what they're doing, shit's gonna stay the same as it always has. This is bigger than just a conference. This is really about making the systemic change that we want to see happen. So for our audience, we're talking about this through the lens of finance because, the title of the podcast is Renegade Capital. So, capital, yeah, that's what we do. But I feel like this shit happens everywhere. It's every industry, whether you are, I don't know, a chef, whether you are in higher ed or whatever it may be. There may be gatherings of people in your field and they aren't appropriately represented, the people who are speaking. And the point that we are essentially trying to make, or that I think we're trying to make, is that this is fucked up and this is why. If you want to make real advancements and want to start thinking differently about your industry as a whole, and for us it's finance, but if you want to start thinking differently about your industry and really want to make a difference and support the people that you care about, then you can't continue to have the same people saying the same things all the time.
Let's talk about what we've seen from our own points of view of conferences. When you go to conferences and let's think about financial conferences, since that's what Sonya and Liv are going to talk about. What is that experience like for you? Who do you see? What do you talk about? Have you noticed, different representations in different financial conferences? It sounds like you were going someplace with that.
So I attended and do attend a lot of finance conferences, not just lending, but like investor conferences. And I'll be honest, when it's people and women of color, they come for 1 year usually, and then they don't come back. And even now I'm on like some of the planning committees for some of these conferences. And I'm like, I don't know why we continue to take this approach. It's a very cliquish environment. I think also conferences have kind of become like people's way to get together. Like, oh, our friends who are all across the country, and this is our chance for us to hang out and get together. And that there is some truth in that, but it's also like, this is a chance for you to get to know other people too. And I'm in this space now as a Black woman. I'll be honest, I'm starting to feel a lot of weight, rightfully so, for me to start bringing other people along with me. And I don't know, I'm sleeping with that, and it's starting to get heavier. So yeah, that has been my experience. People don't come back because they don't feel included, and they don't feel accepted and a part of that place. So they have a high turnover rate.
I think for me, I don't go to a lot of financial kind of core conferences, but economic development, chambers, things like that. And it's like you look at the program and they have, the moderator or the one woman, the moderator may be a person of color or there's a woman thrown in there. But it's probably the same woman that we've seen every year.
Yep. Because they only know one. They only know one.
Right. And then like it goes down to the planning committee. And sometimes even that is that coveted clique, Ebony, like you said, like, oh, no, I mean, we put on this economic forum for the state of Virginia every year. And this is our planning group and whatever. And it's like, I don't know that some of these event producers want to change it. I mean, like one thing, this is something I learned in the TED community. Because TED videos are free, TEDx and all of that are free online, until we started producing the event, I didn't know that the audience was curated and selected. You have to apply to be in the audience at TED, the big TEDs, and you're paying $10,000+ to be in the audience, not only to travel. And so some of these conferences that are about sharing ideas, and I'm not trying to put TED on blast, but they are intentionally exclusive. And unless they want it to change, the planners, the leaders of that, it's not going to. And so I think that's why you see kind of a rise of spinoffs or the unconferences, or like we did a TEDx in Richmond and someone was rightfully pissed about the diversity and inclusive nature of the planning and spun out and did a Bill conference.
What's a Bill conference?
Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure is a movie.
Oh.
So, I just dated myself. But so, in a response to the TED, they did a Bill conference.
Bill, what? Like, who is Bill? What's a Bill?
Yeah. Well, it was a one-time conference that never happened again. But, and maybe that's what, with choir and what they are doing with their certification process. Maybe there are examples of conferences we just haven't gotten the newsletter for yet, beyond kind of the mainstream conversations.
I remember going to a CFA conference once that was for women, a CFA conference for women, and the keynote speaker was a man. What? What a missed opportunity to have a woman speaker.
I think you were really nice to say, oh, that's such a missed opportunity. You know what I say? That's fucked up. Like, who does that? Like, who didn't? Man, anyway.
The men that said, oh, I know, we need to have a affinity group of women, so let's host a thing. They'll talk about makeup and balancing their checkbook and probably some leadership stuff. But
I mean, my thoughts are, to me, that is mansplaining at its finest. Yeah. You sitting up here in front of a group of women telling them what they should be doing.
About financial communication. You're going to talk to women about communicating? Okay.
Man, get up out of here with that. Please.
Well, see, and that's the other side of this, is that we get kind of tokenized, whatever demographic we fit into. Like they have the conference, and then there's one breakout session that's women in business because, we need to be separated and put over there. Like, or there's women's conferences And I always look at the agenda. Sometimes I'm asked to be on a panel or facilitate a little workshop or something, but it's kind of the same content over and over again. And I don't know. It's so gendered. It's like they assume every women's conference needs a yoga session and work-life balance session, which it might. But maybe the other conferences need it too. Like, why is it just the women's conferences?
Everybody needs mental health. Everybody needs work-life balance.
Yeah.
All right. So today we're talking to Sonya Dreizler and Liv Gagnon, the founders of Choir. Sonya is an author and a speaker and an outspoken advocate for racial and gender equity in financial services. She has a 20-year history in the field, including as a broker dealer and an RIA executive. RIA is Registered Investment Advisor. Liv is a media relations specialist, a public relations consultant, and a branding expert who's helped dozens of companies launch into the public eye with a focus on social values.
This is Leah Freemouth.
I'm Ebony Perkins.
This is Andrea Longton, and we are Renegade Capital. Today, we're talking to two women who are changing the face of finance, one conference at a time. Renegade Capital is proud to be sponsored by LenderFit. LenderFit is technology for community lenders, done right. I first fell in love with LenderFit when I realized that it broke down obstacles for small business owners seeking capital by listening to the communities it serves. LenderFit transforms loan applications into projects. The technology streamlines applications and supports customers on their own terms. They meet them where they are. 98% of LenderFit's clients are CDFIs and nonprofit lenders. Thank you for being Season 2's lead sponsor. Visit lenderfit.io for more information about how your CDFI can transform its capacity.
And just to warm up by way of introduction, can you tell us a bit about yourselves and the Choir certifications?
So I'm Liv Gagnon. I'm the co-founder of Choir. My background has been spent basically the last decade in financial PR and media relations. So dealing a lot with journalists, and specifically for the past few years, I've been working with impact-driven organizations to help them brand and go to market. So that's what led me to meeting Sonya and kind of gave me that PR media background lens and that journalistic lens for the idea for Choir. And Sonya and I started talking about it about a year ago and have been working on it ever since.
So my background is I've been working in financial services for about 20 years. And the first portion of that, most of it was a hybrid broker dealer and RIA, an independent BD RIA. And I did a lot of different things there. I started as an executive assistant and took on a lot of responsibility very quickly, moved around the organization, essentially reorganizing each department as I could get my hands on it. I eventually became our chief operating officer, and after that, our CEO. That sounds like a very straight line, and when I tell it that quickly, and it absolutely was not. But we sold that company in 2016, and I started consulting in the ESG and SRI space since I had a lot of experience there. And from there, I started talking in a way I couldn't before in my prior role. I got to really bring in the things that I cared about, talking about racial and gender justice and how they intersect with financial services. And I just hadn't had an opportunity to have a really public voice prior to that. And it's really been an honor to start. I started speaking about that publicly around when I started consulting, and then started speaking and writing more. And that's what led me to meet Liv. And one of the things that happened, because I speak so much about race and gender in finance, and because I go to a lot of conferences, conference organizers, and also journalists have for years asked me for introductions. They want to be intentional about including the voices of women and people of color in their stories and on their stages, and didn't have the network or the resources to make that happen easily. And so often they would call me and ask for introductions, which I was happy to do, but it also takes a lot of time. And I was doing it, as a volunteer, and it wasn't very sustainable. So when Liv called me with this idea about Choir, like how can we connect journalists with sources where journalists can search for sources by their subject matter expertise and come up with a list of brilliant sources who are all women, non-binary folks, or people of color, or some combination thereof. I was like, that's a brilliant idea. Can we do conferences too? And can I be part of this business? And so that's how Choir started. That was the kernel of the idea.
What is Choir certification? What does that look like?
So Choir certification is we look at a conference's prior agenda and look at how well a conference has included the voices of women and people of color. We look at 7 different visibility factors for each speaking slot. So we're not just looking at who is speaking, but how visible are they when they're speaking? For example, a keynote is much more visible, say, than one panelist on a 5-person panel when there's 4 panels happening at the same time. And so we are looking at those 7 visibility factors and the agenda, and then we cross-reference with the race and gender of the speaker. We're able to give a numeric score between 1 and 100 that estimates how well the conference, or rather says how well the conference includes the voices of women and people of color and non-binary folks in comparison to to their representation in the US population. So that is certification. We also work with conferences and give them the conferences that want to improve year over year, to give them tools and resources, scripts, and some hand holding to be able to really create more intentionally representative and safe conferences.
Our idea started with how do we expand the networks of journalists and conference organizers, but it was so important to us to take a step back. And that's what the certification is, because we realized that as an industry, we hadn't really defined what it means to have representation. And we talk so much about diversity, but we don't often include equity and inclusion in that as well. And so we wanted to use the certification not only as a really data-driven, useful tool for conferences and conference organizers, but also as a tool for the industry to begin rethinking and reshaping the way that we talk about representation and why it is so important.
Outside of the event and the audience experience, what's the ripple effect of more representation and visibility in that context?
There are so many reasons why diversity and representation is important. Again, we talk about diversity a lot in terms of having women and people of color in speaking roles as like a nice thing to do. But it is a good for business, right? We know that having diverse perspectives not only teaches us as an industry how to move forward, where our blind spots are, but it also can help mitigate risk, right? Having different viewpoints involved in conversations across our industry can help us see the things that we do not see. Like I, as a white woman, do not see the things that a woman of color sees when we walk into a room. And so having those perspectives is so important. And then I would say the last business implication is that, having the white men who are so prominent in our industry, having them see diverse speakers at stages that look like the world around us, having them see that is so important because it starts subconsciously reprogramming who we see as leaders and who we listen to in our industry. And those are the folks that need to open those doors and make those decisions to bring more women and people of color through their industry and through their company. So there are so many reasons. I know, Sonya, you might have some to add.
Liv covered a lot of it there, including the last point, which is the one that I always want to make, because one of the things that we hear a lot doing this work is the see it, be it idea, right? You have to be able to see somebody on stage that looks like you to know that you belong there too. And while to a certain extent, I think that is true. It's really helpful to see role models that look like you. I do think that there are a lot of folks, I definitely felt it when I was early in my career, that people who do not see people like them represented at the top of companies or on conference stages or in the media, but they know that they are talented and skilled. And it's not a matter of not enough mentors or not enough people that look like me. It's that people like me are not giving credibility. People like me are not seen as leaders. People like me are not listened to. I mean, that it kind of comes down to what Liv was saying before. And it's really the essence of what we're doing, who we listen to as an industry and as individuals, who we listen to matters. And hearing from women, people of color, and especially women of color benefits all of us by, of course, driving innovation, broadening our perspectives, all the things that Liv said. We can expanding our industry's ability to reach more people, but also, like echoing what Liv said, shifting who the industry listens to is a step in the direction of a more equal distribution of power, because seeing women and people of color on stage expands who we view as authorities and who gets to set the direction for the company or for an industry. And so that's why we are so incredibly enthusiastic about working with conference teams and conference organizers. And also media. It's really important. We spend a lot of time talking about conferences, but the experts who are quoted in the media, who's interviewed, who is seen as an authority and a leader.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to ask a question about that media piece. When you said journalist, I immediately thought of like the written word, right? In reading an article. And although I know that I personally look for names, and I'm like, kind of that person, is that a person of color? In the written word, is that still as powerful? Or are you also thinking about like journalists across the board, whether it's something that's, where somebody speaks and they can be seen? Because those are two different things.
Perspectives that represent the world around us. It's not really journalism if we're only looking at one point of view, right? That's like one of the key elements of a good story is having different points of view. And so no matter what the medium, expanding the networks for journalists, and in the financial media space, our journalists are predominantly also white men, our traditional journalists. So it's, they have that network effect of their peers and their contacts and sources typically also fall into that category of being white men. And so the more that we can normalize thinking about prioritizing different lenses, different races and genders in a journalist source library, the more we can really, again, move forward, innovate. And then, of course, seeing women of color on videos and podcasts and all of these fun things that now are incorporated in our media landscape is important for everyone.
Do you think kind of the rapid growth and the diversification of channels has made this work easier, more challenging? What are your thoughts on how social media and these other non-traditional forums have really helped increase access, but also increase other opinions and viewpoints?
I love that question. It's expanded accessibility for more and more people to redefine what it means to be a journalist and what it means to tell stories. And that alone has had a really positive impact, because now, a lot of young women are, starting podcasts and starting video channels and all of these great things. And again, network effect, right? So they tend to have networks that are more leaning toward more women or more women of color. And so the more we can start thinking of media in a more cohesive term, we can really keep expanding representation. I would say that no matter the medium, it really all comes down to network. And that's the big goal, is to help folks expand those networks because it's not always natural for people to do that.
Renegade Capital is proud to be sponsored by Community Capital Management, or CCM. CCM is an investment firm with over 2 decades of experience managing impact and ESG investing portfolios. Its mission seeks to deliver superior risk-adjusted returns through investment strategies that contribute to positive environmental and social outcomes. We're really proud to be sponsored by Community Capital Management because its investments look to benefit underserved individuals, families, and communities, including women and minorities. Visit ccminvest.com to learn more.
I want to circle back to the conferences aspect. What are the standards of the choir certifications? Like, how tough are these to get a good choir certification?
Maybe I could just list off the 4 components of the pledge, and then we can answer your original question if you want about what
please.
The higher standards for certification. Pledge has 4 components. You can read them, the exact wording of them on our website, which is hellochoir.com, and there's a page about the pledge. The first one is diversity in keynotes. So when there's 3 or more keynote speakers, that at least one of them is a woman or a person of color or non-binary person. And then the second one is similar, but it's panels. So on every panel of 4 or more people, one of the experts, not the moderator, needs to be a woman or person of color or non-binary person. What we want to see is somebody who is positioned as an expert represented on that panel. The third is women of color are represented throughout the agenda, not just in the DEI sessions. It's one of the common things we saw when we looked at agendas for conferences is that often women of color are pigeonholed to these DEI panels. And while DEI is an important topic, it is not the only thing that women of color know how to talk about. So we want to see their expertise showcased in many places. And then the fourth one, that the conference must have an enforced anti-harassment policy against harassment of all kinds. Gender-based harassment is probably the most prevalent one at financial services conferences, but there are others as well. And having not just a written policy, but a policy that is written that conference attendees agree to, and ideally that the conference organizer mentions from the stage and is enforced. So there is a mechanism for if there is harassment happening at the conference, there's a way to report it. And the conference organizers are committed to doing something about it, whether that's removing the person who is harassing people or stepping in, or every conference handles it a little bit differently, but it's key that there's a policy that people understand and that the policy be actually enforced, not just words.
I know we've had this conversation before, but I'm still in shock every time we bring up that we're talking about safety and representation, that we need to bring up safety at professional financial services conferences.
We definitely do.
Mm-hmm. Have you had any feedback from women who attend financial services conferences about your focus on safety?
Women specifically seem grateful for that. And I have a lot of personal experience with this. I've experienced harassment and discrimination at conferences, and I wrote about it too. This is an area that I've been thinking about and writing about for years, including specifically harassment at conferences. Not just harassment, assault, discrimination. It's really, there are really terrible stories. Some of them are included in the Do Better series that I published in 2019. So it was key for us to include that in the pledge, that conferences, of course, need representation, but we don't want to be encouraging conferences to include more women and people of color on stage and in attendance if they are not also going to create a safer space for us to work.
I would add that I've heard most of the feedback on that element come from men. I think because it is, it's a foundational element of this business and it's in writing, and the men who sign the pledge are forced to think about it, to adhere to the pledge. I've heard quite a few people come up to me and say, I didn't think of this before. I didn't realize that it was still such a prominent issue, or, it's opened up some eyes, I think, to the fact still that women so subconsciously have to think about safety constantly at these events. And so having it live right on our website and having it be a part of our business just reinforces that importance.
So that's the pledge.
That's a low bar to trip over.
It is a low bar. We still have gotten some pushback.
Wow.
Yes, from a variety of different folks in the industry. Pushback from people who don't want to sign the pledge, which is fine. Like, sign it or don't sign it. It's there as a tool for people who would like it. We're not in the business of forcing or convincing people. And then we've gotten some pushback from organizers as well. But it is what it is, and we're sticking with it. We think it's a pretty achievable bar to go over. The certification is much higher. So if we put a conference through our scoring algorithm, and that conference met the basics of the pledge and did not exceed them by much, the conference would probably score in the maybe mid-20s to high 30s, something like that, out of 100. And to get choir certification, you need a minimum of 60, a minimum score of 60. That's for bronze. And then, of course, we have silver and gold. And the gold level certification is reserved for those conferences that have included the voices of women and people of color at levels equal to or close to their representation in the US population. And that is actually quite hard to achieve.
Yeah. How are folks shaking out in the conference certification?
For the conferences that we have worked with and the conferences that we looked at when we were building out the score, what we've seen is that conferences that are trying and putting some intention into representation, and maybe they've been at it for a year or a couple of years, we find that they usually score high enough to get a bronze. And that's the idea. Maybe they begin at bronze, but they want to score higher and higher year over year, and we give them the tools and training to do that. And then conferences that are very, very intentional about representation, they're intentional, and they're not just intentional around gender, but they're also intentional around race, and they're intentional around the intersection of those and making sure to have women of color on stage. Those conferences are the ones that are getting the very high scores. And one of the reasons, if you don't mind getting a little bit numbers nerdy with me here, is that one of the things that we built into the algorithm is to account for the fact that women of color have been discriminated against on both race and gender. So there's essentially a doubling factor for their voices in the algorithm. So if a conference does not do well at including the voices of women of color, the score goes down rather quickly. And the fastest way to increase the score is to put women of color on stage in high visibility roles. And we did that on purpose. We did it to, of course, account for that double discrimination. And also because we know that people want to score higher year over year, and people want to know, how does the scoring work? And can I game the system? And yeah, absolutely. We invite you to. We would love for you to game this and try to score as high as possible by making all of your keynotes women of color. That would be great. Go ahead.
As an attendee, when I see these certifications it's done retroactively.
It's done retroactive. Yeah. A conference agenda can change really up until usually a couple weeks before it's pretty set. But because the changes happen so frequently and up until the last couple of weeks, we will wait to certify until after the conference is over, because the scoring is absolutely 100% based on data. There's no subjective, well, they tried. We do score based on the previous agenda, and the seal has a year on it. And conferences can use that to market their next event and say, our last event earned a bronze or a silver or whatever. And they can put it on their marketing to show that they are committed and in the past have actually earned certification.
Yeah. And to add to that, it's not just the score, right? So it's, we collect all of the data, we find what their acquire score is, and then we use all of that data to put together our analysis for the conference. So we don't just hand them, an Excel spreadsheet of this is how you did, but where are the trends from that, your speaker lineup? Where are there opportunities to improve? We give them a analytics and visibility report at the end that we go through with maybe just their conference team or their leadership, whomever. And that shows, for instance, out of all of your sponsored sessions, 80% were white men. So let's work on outreach specifically to sponsors for next year to encourage them to send women. We look pretty granularly at race and ethnicity. So we can see that, your conference did not have any AAPI or Latina women, right? And so those trends are really helpful because it helps the conference organizers and the team internally speak to their leadership and gives them the language and the tools to be able to improve that score. So that's a huge part that we're really proud of, to be able to collect that type of data.
As you're getting to know the conference planners and the folks signing these pledges, what are some of the things that I guess you pick up from their engagement or questions that they have about these policies or the certification that you're like, okay, they're living this versus like, my boss told me to do this and I'm just filling out the forms, or oh, now there's a harassment policy that wasn't there last time we chatted. I guess I'll sign it. Like, kind of just half in.
First, let me clarify. It's a question we get a lot around the pledge. The people who can sign the pledge are people who participate in the conference. So people who attend the conference, people who speak at the conference, and companies who sponsor the conference. Conference cannot sign the pledge. But we hope that conferences meet all 4 aspects of the pledge, but a conference can't sign. The conference can come work with us, can get certified if they want to, and they can look at the four specs and meet them. And we hope that they do. But we didn't want to be in charge of like policing whether the conferences who say they meet the 4 specifications actually do. And we didn't want to confuse that with conferences that we've actually worked with and certified. So, but we have heard from conference organizers who have seen the pledge specs. They've seen their attendees signing the pledge and have said, okay, I have to do this now. We have to get our house in order because I've seen hundreds of people sign this pledge and we need them to come to our conference because that is part of our business. And so, yes, they have called us and often they'll want clarification. Well, what do you mean exactly by this? And what do you mean exactly by that?
And who's liable?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we have heard questions from conference organizers. Mostly though, conference organizers are really, have been very enthusiastic about what we're doing, especially when we're able to work with them, the tools and resources that we're able to give them, because this is something that has been on their agenda, for lack of a better word, their internal agenda for most of them for at least a few years. And it just didn't have metrics. We'll try to have more women. And it kind of ended at that. There's often a committee that helps find speakers. And so the committee is tasked with try to bring in women speakers, but it's not a measurable number. And even if they do, find a few women here or there, they're often not focused on racial or ethnic representation, and certainly not on finding women of color. And then the other piece that happens is because this is not measurable, it's just a good intention. If somebody, say there's a panel with 3 men and 1 woman, and the women at the last minute can't come, like 2 weeks before something comes up, she can't come, people will fill it with the first person they can find, which is somebody in their network, which is probably a man. And so what happens when there's nothing measurable is that when you're time constrained, you just go to the easiest thing possible, right? But having metrics in place and really specific goals that they're trying to meet has been welcomed by most of the conference organizers that we've talked to. Not all of them, but most of them.
It took us a year to nail down what these metrics are, what our visibility factors are. Again, we're two white women. We do not come into this with every perspective. And so we sat and listened to so many people about their experiences as speakers and as conference organizers and attendees, and really thought long and hard about, what are the different elements that impact not only who is speaking, but how prominent they are as speakers. And so, things like having women of color speaking in roles that are not just about DEI, right? We see a lot that CEOs and presidents of companies who are women of color and absolutely brilliant are asked to speak, and they're on like the DEI panel down the hall in like the Magnolia room, as we say, on the side. And so we've really worked hard to address all of that. And that's a huge learning lesson for conference organizers, and one that so far they've found extremely useful to have that insight.
Do you only do finance conferences? Are you open to other industries?
For now, only finance, but we really want to show this working in finance, because if it can work in finance, it's pretty transferable, right? Because the issue here is pretty pronounced, and we know it can work here. And so once we see that through, then the plan is to expand. We've already had requests from tech, law, and healthcare primarily, but also education.
Entertainment. I mean, the first day that we launched, we had so much amazing response from the financial industry, but what we didn't expect was the immediate response of people in complete other industries saying, "Oh my gosh, you need this for healthcare."
When will you come here?
Yeah. So we're really excited about that. And with a so far 2-person team, we're trying to just do the most we can, the quickest we can. So
what does Choir stand for?
I was going to ask the same thing. What is Choir? Why did you name it Choir?
So I do branding for a living, consulting, and usually it is this long drawn out process for naming a company. I would like to say that it was here, but it was actually nothing special. It just like popped in to my head. And, we think that we've heard one type of voice for so long in our industry. And with Choir, we're really looking to bring all of the voices together because, as corny as it sounds, imagine listening to a one-note choir or a one-part choir. It's not interesting and it's never going to get anywhere. So that's where the name comes from. And just the response since we launched in January of all the different kinds of voices reaching out and just saying like, thank you for, articulating what we've been saying. I mean, that's just meant so much to us.
For our listeners, who want to do something, but they don't quite know how to get started, what tips or tricks would you have for something concrete that they can do? And keep in mind that a lot of our listeners do attend financial conferences.
Yeah. So if your listeners attend financial conferences, we would welcome them to check out the pledge and sign it, please, if it is a good, fit for them. And if they attend conferences, but maybe not financial services conferences, or if they are unable to sign the pledge for some reason, but do attend conferences, they are welcome to look at the specs and refer to them when a conference comes up and say, hey, representation and safety is important to me. Do you know if your conference meets these 4 baseline standards? We have language for that on the website under pledge resources. If you're involved in conferences of some sort, make it known that this is important to you. Of course, whatever area of your life that this impacts, I hope that your listeners will bring it there.
I'm really excited that one of our sponsors, so I work in an organization that hosts a financial conference, and one of our sponsors did say, hey, are you getting a choir certification? So if you are a sponsor listening, it's a good time to call the conference that you're hoping to sponsor and ask about a choir certification, because safety and representation are important to you. So to wrap up, we always ask our guests a closing question. And so Liv, I'll ask you first and then go to Sonya. Liv, what does being a renegade mean to you?
I'm glad Liv had to go first.
not asking for permission, doing what you know is right, and with all of the means that you have without waiting for all of the people in charge and the systems that might not support you to give you approval to do that.
Yes, I love it. Thank you.
Gosh, what does a renegade mean to me? The thing I keep coming back to, Liv and I say to each other a lot, that we're going up against the status quo, and what we're doing is new, and we get a fair amount of pushback sometimes, and it's often from people who benefit from the status quo staying the same. And so one of the things that we try to keep in mind is that if you're in the business of changing the game, you've got to stop seeking validation from people who benefit from maintaining the status quo. You're not going to get the approval. So don't go searching for the stamp of approval from a system that you're trying to challenge or break.
I've heard you say that before, and those words come back to me. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And thank you for having us on. This is really fun. This is a bright spot in the week. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
They're so chill.
I love what they're doing because sometimes it can be easy to complain.
Mm-hmm.
I think one thing that I've always been taught is you lift as you climb. It's very clear to me that they have taken that to heart and they're really doing it. Like it's, some people can easily say, oh yeah, you need to have more women up here. But for them to really take a serious approach and focus about women of color and telling people, hey, you can game the system by supporting women of color, they don't get a benefit from that, but they're like, I'm going up this ladder. Come on, you coming too. That says a hell of a lot. And I respect that.
Do you think the conferences that you attend would consider getting a choir certification?
I know this is a podcast and people can't see me roll my eyes. I do totally feel that there will be some people in some conferences trying to get the certification. I think what will need to happen, if I'm just transparent, there are going to be some people on the inside, like it may be one or two, but we'll have to push it in order to get them to recognize the benefit of this. And you know what? Let me rephrase that. It's not just going to be from the inside. I'm so glad that they said attendees and sponsors have a say in this, because they do. If you hit people where the money is, it's like they just wake up. And I think that we can have a larger impact through our voice. So I think people will do it on their own? Probably not. Some will, but not everybody. But the other folks can encourage them to do it.
Yeah, I think I agree, Ebony. I think the sponsors would have a big influence on some planners. I guess I'm thinking about, because having been on the event planning side, like the events I was personally involved in and the ones I like to attend would love this, just because that's the nature of who's there around the table. It's all volunteer led. It's totally different kind of purpose, but I don't know. Like I'm thinking about some of the small business conferences or chamber conferences that are done every year. And I don't, unless it's kind of like money mandates it or something, or maybe they get someone with a little energy around it that one year, it might, then after the fact, it might happen. But I don't know. I mean, the event stuff that I'm involved in, I'm going to share this with, maybe they'll come over to some volunteer led events and we can certify it. Kind of remind me of like the B certification.
What is B certification?
So for benefit corporations, and so there's two pieces of being a B Corp. And being a B Corp is a for-profit business that basically says we're going to use business for good. And so another kind of jargony way to say it is shareholders and stakeholders have the same level of importance in business decisions. So sourcing local, recycling, even if it costs more money, that if they're a benefit corporation, then they legally, through their corporate structure, have said they're going to do this. That's a corporate structure you can do at, in certain states where you can, like Virginia. The other piece of that is a B certification through B Lab, which is a nonprofit. I don't know enough about it, but it's a nonprofit that you submit kind of an assessment like you do a CDFI certification, or it sounds like this, and then they evaluate the company on culture, environmental practices, fair wages, diversity, and then you get like best in the world or B certified and things like that. So Ben & Jerry's is a B Corp, Seventh Generation Cleaning's a B Corp, REI is a B Corp. And so you have these kind of social good companies out there that market that they are socially minded. That's where I have mixed feelings, because some of them really do live by the business practices they got certified by. And then I know of others that I know personally that are like, oh, we just know how to fill out the certification. So it's a marketing ploy, to be like, oh, I'm B certified. But do you really have the employee practices and the PTO and the maternity leave, paternity leave that or parental leave that you say you do? I don't know sometimes. And there's no way to audit it, because they just take in the applications every year. I might have that wrong. I may have changed that now, but when I was more involved in that process, it was a send your information up, they assess it, they approve it, you're certified. So.
Makes me think about Liv and Sonya's measurable equals manageable, measurable equals manageable, where in order to manage something, to make change, it has to go beyond what is your intent, or what are you saying you're going to do or what to do versus what is the impact. And to be able to just have the data and say, you had 5 panels, 4 of them were all male. That ain't it. And so just to have that baseline and to put it down on paper so that it is important. Because sometimes you just say, oh, we really want to do that, but you never put it on paper because you don't want it to be written down, or you don't want it to be discoverable in any form.
The conversation around the harassment policy is very timely for me based on a trip I just got back from, a work trip, business trip. And it was a conference light. It wasn't a curated, it kind of was. Anyway, there were moments in the after hours, after the structured day, where the hallway conversations, the networking was happening. And things get a little loose, and you're cussing more. There's more innuendos, and it seems okay, right? But then there are moments, and I was with a woman that's younger in tenure and younger in age, and we were the only 2 women in a smaller group, and there was drinking involved, not necessarily us, but that was, again, later in the day. And I'm like, I don't know any of these men. I'm not gonna leave her by herself. But also, these are our professional peers. It's not that I didn't trust them, but as a woman, you're thinking about your safety and security. And there was a passing comment aimed at me about, my dress and something. And I'm like, I don't know where the line is with this stuff. And I think conferences are so hard because you don't work for the guys, you don't see that person ever again, right? Because they go to California and you go back to your place. But the people that asked you to come and be in that room together, are they liable for me being, I don't know where that line is. And I appreciate that the choir is just putting it out there right in front and drawing attention to it. Because it was after I got home, when I was processing with my husband, I'm like, I don't know. Where was that line? Was I should I have left? Should I have, and he's like, but had I thought about it prior to, and had signed a pledge, at least it would have been more top of mind. So I think that's very important.
Are you okay?
Oh yeah, no. I mean, it was I don't feel harassed, but in that, and I've been in situations where it was harassment, but there's that was my experience. I don't know what the woman next to me feels like, and there's a very fine line there, especially outside of the structured environment, but you're still there because the conference brought you there.
You have to put yourself in situations that you might not always feel like, I don't know, if you want to
network and
advance
get the deal done.
Because that's a big part of conferences is you go there to meet people. And oh my gosh, we get to meet people in person again as we're having in-person conferences again.
That is exactly what I said to Jacob when I got home. I said, I those after hours conversations were so much more valuable than any of the hallway stuff. And me and so, we bonded over playing pool. We're like, I'm going to call, that is absolutely worth it.
I mean, at conferences, the real stuff happens in the hallways, not in the rooms. So it's always this balance from an event organizing of making sure people have space in both. It just always strikes me every time I talk to Sonya or Liv about the choir certification and what that means and why they're doing it, that there is a harassment policy, and that is one of the 4 tenets, and we still have to do that. And if listeners, if you've not read it before, and Leah and Ebony, if you've not read it before, Sonya Dreizler's Do Better series talking about, I don't want to put words in her mouth at all, but about being a woman in finance and at financial services conferences and what that means is really powerful, and it's well worth a read. It's a balance, especially as finance is very male dominated and has stereotypical pieces that come up, and it doesn't have to be every person that has those stereotypical tendencies, but it just takes one to totally push you out the door of finance. I'm not doing that. I'm not interested. And how many doors have been shut to women because of one person at a conference?
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Renegade Capital Podcast. You can listen to previous episodes on your favorite podcasting platform, and be sure to follow us on social media at Renegade Capital Podcast, or check out our website at www.renegadecapitalpodcast.com to never miss a new release.